So last time we looked at a really important and influential figure in the history of Western philosophy. We looked at John Locke. Good morning. And Locke tried to offer us a pretty commonsensical view of reality and how we know what's out there, right? He basically said, knowledge is gained through experience. We can learn what the world is like because these objects that exist outside of ourselves, independently of us, produce certain ideas in our minds. And then by compounding those ideas together and reflecting on them, they give us some clue as to what's going on and what's out there. Well, today we're looking at another Enlightenment figure who's going to offer us a different view on how we can come to know reality and what it is like. And in some ways, what this thinker thinks can be known about the world should rest on a different form of knowledge, and he's engaged in what I would say is a more ambitious project. Whereas Locke, there was a thread of humility kind of in his understanding of what we could learn about the world that we live in. This thinker is going to try to, really get to the bottom of things. And what we see in his philosophy is this belief or this idea that there are certain things that we can know with absolute certainty. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. Of course, we're continuing on in our first unit, which is Metaphysics and Epistemology. So the views that we're going to be looking at are having to do with this guy's theory of knowledge, epistemology, and his metaphysics, his theory about what makes all this stuff up, and consequently kind of his view of human nature and how we interface with the universe. So today we're looking at René Descartes. Some thinkers think that his works are the start of the Enlightenment. Others, as I noted last time, think that the Enlightenment started in 1691 with the publishing of Locke's piece, An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. René Descartes was writing before Locke, but he is writing very much in the spirit of this Enlightenment tradition that we talked about last time. Prioritizing reason, this disposition to use reason and the scientific method to understand more about all this stuff. And this belief that the light of reason can illuminate our reality for us, and if we really lean into it, we can come to a fuller, better knowledge of all of this. René Descartes was a French philosopher, writer, mathematician. If you've ever heard the word Cartesian, like the Cartesian coordinate system in math, the XY graph, that's a product of Descartes' works. He's somebody who's incredibly influential in the way that Western science, mathematics, and philosophy has developed over the last few hundred years. So he was writing across a lot of different disciplines, and he brings a remarkable logical precision and influence to the history of philosophy. Arguably, known as the father of what we call modern philosophy, René Descartes is one of the most influential philosophers ever. And basically everybody writing after him, including a lot of French thinkers and philosophers, lean heavily on his philosophy and some of the ideas that he develops in the piece that we're looking at today, Meditations on First Philosophy. What Descartes provides for us is a more explicit formulation of a certain method of logical and rational inquiry that he thinks is going to be able to, allow us to get to the bottom of things. Contrary to how intellectuals were thinking about these issues and trying to work them out before his time, Descartes is going to begin with systematic doubt. He's going to begin his analysis and his working out of these questions with skepticism, with doubt. And so his starting point is the ending point of a lot of skeptics' inquiries into these ideas, topics, and questions. And this is what we see in the work that we're investigating today. He begins by doubting everything. But it's not good enough just to doubt things. You don't get to knowledge by just doubting things. You're kind of just left floating, hanging in the epistemic air. So his method is as follows. To tease out answers to these fundamental questions, you begin with doubt. Then you proceed with analysis of the question or the topic at hand. This word, analysis, we can trace it back to a Greek word, of which that word has the root in it, which basically means to break apart or to break down. So what are you doing when you're analyzing something? Well, you're looking at this thing, and you're breaking it apart into all of its components, and you're looking at all the components individually, trying to figure out what's going on there, understanding how it works, tracing the logical relationships between all these different components. And then, once you have a clearer understanding of how all of these things relate to one another and what's going on, you do a synthesis. You put them all back together, and hopefully what you receive after doing that and tracing the logical relationships and seeing how they relate to one another is a fuller, more complete understanding of the thing that you're looking at. And then, because Descartes is a rational guy, a thorough guy, his method ends with careful recapitulation of arguments, checking and double-checking his premises, his arguments, his reasons and justifications, making sure it all makes sense, it all logically flows together, and then expressing that, usually in writing, much like a mathematician would express some sort of fundamental mathematical truth through the proof, where you write it all down and show how they all connect to one another. In the same spirit, Descartes is trying to bring the precision and certainty of mathematical truths to the realm of philosophy more generally. So he's interested in trying to see if we can work out some of the basic questions of human existence, such as what is all this stuff? What is this made of? Using the same rigor and logical analysis that mathematicians would use to prove theorems and things like that. He has a very mathematical mind. He's going to employ the same kind of argumentation and analysis in his philosophy. Because he is writing during this time period of the Enlightenment, which, as we discussed last time, was preceded by the Renaissance, which means rebirth. During this time, there was a re-examination and a re-exploration of some of the fundamental ideas and themes on which Western society and ideas were based, a re-examination of the classical texts, a rebirth in knowledge and inquiry. Well, society and ideas and views don't stay static, they evolve. And we see that kind of evolution in what Descartes is trying to accomplish. You could imagine him saying something like this. Oh, I didn't include it there, but reason and scientific analysis can take us higher than our forebears. See, they had kind of a limited understanding of the world. They had some good ideas. But look, if we use this reason thing and we analyze and we be logical and we provide arguments and justifications, we can come to a fuller understanding of the world. So we can rise higher than those that we have been leaning on for so long in our understanding of these things. Characteristic of this impulse or this view is exploring and investigating things for yourself. Not just taking things on authority, not just accepting what has come before as fact, but actually sitting down and wrestling with it yourself. And that's exactly what Plato is trying to get us to do in the Allegory of the Cave, and that's what Descartes is going to be doing in this piece, his Meditations on First Philosophy. So, what is Descartes doing? Well, in this piece, he's going to lay out a number of views, and he's going to supply arguments and justifications for them. Some views which he shares with Locke, but at least one fundamental view that is in direct opposition to Locke's. What theory of knowledge did Locke provide? I said it earlier. How do we obtain knowledge of the world around us? Yes. Through our senses, exactly. Yeah, we see and touch and smell and taste and hear things. And through our sense organs and through experience, we can come to a better knowledge of this stuff. That view is known as empiricism, right? We get that word empirical. It's associated with the word empirical. Thus, in Locke's philosophy, what we see is, trust in the senses, that the senses can get us to an understanding of objective reality. Descartes, at least at the beginning of these meditations, does not have the same trust in the senses. And he doesn't think that we should orient human life necessarily around just lived experience. He is an Enlightenment thinker through and through, and so what he's going to say is the way that we can come to a better understanding of all this stuff and what we should orient our lives around, society, law, politics, science, is a priori reason, logical deductions that are conclusive and certain. This view is known as rationalism. So Descartes was the thinker primarily who laid the foundations for this epistemological view that would then come to influence and structure a lot of thinkers after him. Rationalism is the view that the way that we primarily obtain knowledge of the universe is through reason or our reasoning capacities. And he lays out a few different arguments for why he thinks this is what we should be leaning on rather than just what our senses give us. Compare that with empiricism, which says, yes, logic and reason can take us, pretty far, but experience is necessary for knowledge, and perhaps we should lean on the experiences of people in deciding how we should set up our society, organize ourselves, etc. Does that make sense? So if you wanted to, you could kind of associate these views with different terms. Maybe you could associate objective with rationalism. We're after objective, universal, rational truths that anybody can deduce using their reason. Maybe you would associate subjective more with empiricism. We need to pay attention and listen to the experiences of people. People have different experiences. We got to collate all of that. Descartes is a rationalist. And we're going to look at a famous example that he provides in this piece that he tries to use to demonstrate that this is the way to go. This is what we should be using in science and philosophy and all of that. Now that is his epistemological view. What about his metaphysical view? This he actually shares with Locke, although we didn't get to the part where Locke makes this explicit in his writings. Can anybody remind the class, what is metaphysics? What is it about? You know what physics is, right? What's physics? Nobody knows what physics is. Yeah?
It's like studying movements and velocities.
Yeah, like explanations or inquiry into natural phenomena, I guess, right? Like how things move, why they move that way, reactions, all that stuff. Well, metaphysics is basically that, but deeper. It asks more fundamental questions. Physics can tell us how an electron is going to behave in a magnetic field, but what metaphysics tries to get at is, what's an electron? What's an electron made of, fundamentally? What is a field? What does it mean to say we're surrounded by these fields? What is that? Well, that's what metaphysics tries to investigate. Our contemporary scientific view, which we're going to look at next time, basically posits that all of this stuff that you see around you, everything that you interact with, is made up of matter. This one substance called matter, right? This table is made up of matter, you're made up of matter, the lights are made up of matter, stars and planets are made up of matter. Descartes is going to take a different view. He thinks that there are two fundamental substances that make up everything in the universe. Yes, a lot of things are made up of matter, but can we reduce the human being to physical explanation and matter and atoms, or is there something more going on there? For example, does the human being have some sort of immaterial mind or soul that is distinct from material things, different in kind? That's the view Descartes is going to push. It's known as dualism. He thinks that, yes, there are things made up of matter. That is a substance that makes things up, constitute things. But then there's this other thing that is different and separate from matter. What we might call, I don't know, mental stuff, mentality. And the human being is a composite of these two substances, for example. We have a body, a brain, but we also have this thing called a mind or a consciousness. And this thing is not made up of matter or atoms. It's not extended in space. It doesn't have volume like a table does. It's not something that you can divide, like you could just, cut this table in two, right? And then you got, does it make sense to ask what half a mind looks like? Can you give me 3/8 of a notion? No, these are mental things, and Descartes thinks these things are different than the material things that we think make up the objects in our universe. So, he's what we would call a dualist. We can contrast this view with monism, which is the view that there's one underlying substance that makes up everything up. And as far as monistic views go, people normally fall into two camps. We're going to look at this next lecture. The contemporary scientific view, which thinks everything's matter, and then a very weird view called idealism that says actually all of this is just minds and ideas. So look forward to exploring that next time. In any case, Descartes is going to provide arguments for dualism in this piece. This is what he believes in. This is his position. Like Locke. Locke actually believed this too. But not only did he lay the foundations for modern dualism, he kind of pioneered his own view, a view that we call Cartesianism, which is kind of a more specific, more particular form of the rationalism that we just looked at. Descartes thinks that knowledge of the universe can be derived through a priori logical reasoning. What did a priori mean again? Prior to what? Prior to experience, exactly. So Descartes' going to say, look, we can obtain a lot of knowledge of the world without ever having to experience it. For example, what number comes after 12 billion and 4? 12 billion and 5. Did you need to count up 12 billion and 4 things and then be like, oh yeah, okay, the next one's 12 billion and 5? No, you just knew that, right? Your mind is directly aware somehow of the logical connections between numbers, what number comes after which other number. You didn't need to go out in the world and see 12 billion and 4 things to know that if you added one more, it would be 12 billion and 5. Or, for example, there were 6 people in this room, and then they left, and then 12 people came into the room. Is that more or less than before? More. You didn't need to see anybody come into the room to know that. You didn't need to have that experience. You arrived at that conclusion through a priori logical reasoning. Now, where Descartes is going to differ from Locke, and this is one of the fundamental oppositions of their philosophies, is that Descartes is going to say we can deduce the way reality works and is through innate ideas and concepts. Somehow we come into the world pre-programmed with ideas and concepts about the world, such as God, the concept of God, and things like that, maybe right and wrong. In contrast to Locke, who thought what? We are tabula rasa. What did that mean?
Two kinds of ideas, right? Simple, complex.
Tabula rasa, yeah.
Humans are born with innate ideas, and their minds get furnished with ideas that they have experienced.
Yeah, they're not born with innate ideas. Locke thinks that our minds are blank slates. We're not born with any concepts or ideas. Our minds get ideas added to them as we have experiences. Descartes thinks the opposite. He thinks, no, we actually come pre-programmed with ideas and concepts that we then use and shuffle around to make deductions and come to knowledge of things. Did you have a question before?
Yeah. So whenever you're saying like the 6 people leave the room, 12 people come in, that's just based on like our logical reasoning.
That's what Descartes would say. Yeah.
What about if someone doesn't know numbers in the scheme, like they were never introduced to like addition and subtraction? Like
that's a good question.
How would they fall underneath?
I think Descartes would still say that they have the innate ideas and concepts needed to do that logical operation, but they just haven't been taught really how, maybe? Not exactly sure how he would respond to that. But if you find somebody who doesn't know how numbers work, let me know. So these are Descartes' views. Everything in the universe is made up of two fundamental substances, matter and mental stuff, which are minds, ideas, or we could say consciousness, and matter. And the project that he's engaged in is he's going to try to utilize a priori logical reasoning to come to a fuller, more objective, certain knowledge of the world around us, without having to concede that there's only so much that we can learn because our experience is limited, like Locke kind of implied. Okay, does this make sense so far? All right. Now, this piece that I asked you to read for today is one of the most important works Descartes has ever written, one of the most important works in the history of philosophy. It's called Meditations on First Philosophy. What is a meditation? I'm not talking about, sitting in the full lotus, chanting a mantra. What's another definition we have for meditation?
It's almost like a self-reflection.
Yeah, like a self-reflection. Like when you're meditating on something in your mind, you're thinking about it, you're trying to work it out, right? You're reflecting on something. And that's what Descartes does. What he writes in this piece is basically like an autobiographical series of reflections that he is having, that he is going through, where he's thinking about some of these deep problems and issues, secluded away from everybody else, alone in a hut with his thoughts. Does that sound terrifying to anybody else? Just wait until we get into the conclusions he comes to. What he's trying to do is something very ambitious. See, the lesson we got from Plato's cave was that odds are high that we are living in a cave, that we are living in multiple caves, right? Our understanding of reality is limited. And so if we want to live a fuller, more virtuous, better life, we have to try to exit the cave. Descartes is thinking about this himself. And what we see him do in the opening pages is imply that, wow, I've had a long education on science and mathematics and history and philosophy. I've never really sat down and thought about whether or not I have good reasons for believing this stuff. I've just kind of accepted what my educators told me, what my parents told me, what the system has told me. It's high time that I actually reflect on this stuff. See if I actually have a true understanding of what's going on. See if I have good arguments and justifications for my views. And so he's re-examining his own body of knowledge and whether or not it's justified. But he's also engaged in something more ambitious than that. He's trying to develop a system and develop a body of knowledge that is going to be firm and certain for humanity moving forward. So that if he can find truths that are indubitable, if you can find the truth, we can rest our inquiry of the natural world and on everything on more firm and certain foundations. Because up until this point in history, again, at least through the period of ancient philosophy and medieval philosophy, a lot of people's understandings of the world was taken on the basis of faith, right? And tradition and these founding narratives and mythologies. But because Descartes is inflamed by reason and this idea that reason can take us higher than our predecessors, he's thinking, well, we need to make sure that our body of knowledge, its foundations are firm and certain. Because otherwise, if we build up our knowledge of the world on shaky foundations, we can't trust it, and bad things might happen. So, he's engaged in a really ambitious project here. What he's trying to do in this piece is re-examine his own body of knowledge and its foundations, and to try to reconstruct that for himself and the foundations and justifications for human knowledge in general. This is a crazy thing to do. Okay? Unless you're really, really smart, then maybe you can pull it off. I don't know. We'll see if you think he does a good job. And so he's going to meditate on all this. He's going to meditate on what he's been taught, his experiences, his views. He's going to use reason to reflect on that and try to figure out how good is his knowledge. Does human knowledge rest on firm, certain foundations? If not, can we get there? How can we get there? So what he's taking on in this piece, it's hard to overstate, is monumental. Okay? But in a few short pages, he managed to change the trajectory of Western history and Western philosophy forever. So, insofar as we're trying to understand these ideas, broaden the horizons of our consciousnesses, trying to figure out what this is and what's going on, I think it's a good idea that we investigate this and see what he has to say. So, where does he begin? Well, like I said earlier, he begins with doubt. He begins calling things into question. Because he's looking for firm, certain foundations for human knowledge, he's going to presume a certain view of what the conditions of knowledge are. What is necessary for knowledge. This view is what we have come to call epistemic infallibilism. It's the view that knowledge of something requires complete certainty. For example, did anybody drive here today? Yeah? Where did you park? Lot E. Are you certain your car's still there?
I hope so.
Are you sure I didn't break in and hotwire it?
I mean, there wouldn't have been a lot of time in the kind of time like I came here and saw you in here, so.
I can run pretty fast.
Okay.
So now we might ask, do you know that your car is still there?
Not necessarily, no.
All right, that's kind of Descartes' intuition too. He's like, well, look, I'm looking for these firm, certain foundations. If I have a reason to doubt something, I'm going to assume I don't know it. I got to work a little harder. I have to dispel that doubt. And I think this is a useful and interesting starting place because, well, Descartes is making his job difficult, which is good. If we're looking for true, certain, objective knowledge, we probably shouldn't expect it's going to be easy to find and figure out. And again, we want something conclusive to rest our body of knowledge on moving forward, to ground human inquiry moving forward. So, this is generally the project that he is engaged in. And as we'll see, his doubt, his skepticism is going to take him to strange places. You may have asked yourselves some of the questions he's going to ask himself if you've ever gotten really high. Some of these thoughts come across like that. But I think they're fun and interesting to explore nonetheless. Did y'all do the reading? I hope you did. Did it make any sense? Were you like, what the fuck is going on here? Well, if you did get at least a few pages into it, can somebody tell us, what does Descartes begin by doubting? This is going to set his philosophy and his trajectory in a different direction than Locke's. Exactly. He begins by doubting the senses. Oh, look at that. I even had a little clue for you on the slide. Remember, the senses, what we touch, hear, see, smell, and taste. For Locke, this is the basis of how we obtain knowledge in the world. But Descartes doesn't think this is going to be a firm foundation for human knowledge. Why do you think that is? Why would he call the senses into question and the ideas that the senses give us? Use your reason. Why might you doubt what you hear or smell or feel?
Is it maybe because like everyone might have a different, like people like taste different, like eat the same thing but not taste the same thing?
Yeah, people have different experiences. Yeah, that might give us reason to doubt them. Like if you have a different experience of what this room looks like and I have a different one, who's right?
Like, you could kind of go back to like the dress, like if it was like black and gold, gold and white, and what was it, blue and black?
Something like that, yeah.
Just like the different perspectives everybody has, so like the doubt that we really don't know what the like, true dress is unless the person comes out and says it.
Yeah. I'm looking for a particular answer here. I don't know if I'm leading you in the right direction. Yeah.
Doesn't he doubt everything because of dreams?
Yeah, we're going to get there.
Okay.
Yeah. But just think about your own experience in life. Have your senses always been reliable? Can you remember a time when you were fooled by your senses? You ever walk through a desert and see a mirage? You're like, oh, look at that, a vending machine in the desert. No, right? Have you ever felt a vibration in your pocket? You're like, oh, my boyfriend texted me. Nothing, right? You didn't get a notification, right? Or you heard something in your dorm room late at night, and you're like, Jesus. And there's nothing there, right? The senses can and do deceive us sometimes. And this is what Descartes says. They can and do deceive us sometimes. In the case of mirages, the phantom vibration, all of that stuff. You've seen things that were not actually there. You've heard things that are not actually there. If you knew somebody in your life who deceived you sometimes and was unreliable, would you trust them? No, right? So Descartes is saying, why should we trust these things? They can and do deceive us sometimes. These are not going to be a firm, certain foundation for human knowledge because they're not reliable. And we can always doubt what we're sensing. Now, okay, so maybe the senses can and do deceive us, so maybe they're not going to be able to give us this firm foundation that we're looking for. But maybe something else can. Is there something in your life that you think you know with absolute certainty? Yeah. What were you mouthing? Yeah.
Maybe like our gender, I guess.
Okay, and why? Why would you say that?
Well, like particular features, I guess.
How's this as a response? Maybe you could say you know your gender because you are immediately aware of it in your own mind. The information doesn't need to go through your sense organs, right? It's just self-evident to you that you're a man or a woman or non-binary or trans or whatever. Anything else that you think might be able to serve as a firm, certain foundation for human knowledge? God or religion? Yeah, perhaps. Let's think more enlightenment-y. What do you think they would say? What has been firm and certain since, I don't know, the foundation of human inquiry, way back in the time of the ancient Greeks?
The sun. Like the sun's in the sky during the day and then the moon at night. It always has stayed the same.
That's true, according to our experience. Think about something more abstract. Mathematics? Can a triangle have 4 sides? How many degrees are in the angles, the internal angles of a triangle? Anybody remember? 180. And does that ever change? No, it's been the same forever, right? 2 plus 2 equals what? Has that ever changed? No, it's been the same forever. So Descartes thinks, okay, maybe this mathematics thing, we can rest our knowledge on that, maybe build it up from that, right? Because we know what the rules of arithmetic are. We know these axioms in geometric studies. Maybe that could serve as a firm and certain foundation. Yeah?
Well, what if you just counted wrong because your eyes got to you, and there actually were 4 sides instead of 3 sides?
What if you're counting wrong? Yeah. Have you ever had a dream where the math or the physics was off? I have. It's been strange. I was convinced, that like 3 plus 9 is 17 or something. And that's the way, those were the rules of the dream. And I was like, yeah, duh. 17, Clarissa. So maybe math could serve as a foundation. But it seems like when we investigate mathematics, maybe there's something going wrong in how we're doing it, and how would we know that? This brings up the question, is mathematics something that we've discovered or invented? If it's something that we've invented, why should we think it actually can tell us about how the world works, right? It's just a system that we've slapped onto the world to make sense of it. So Descartes wants to hang on to the possibility that, okay, maybe the senses deceive us, but maybe we can find something else that is firm and certain. Even if we're asleep, because he would say 2 plus 2 equals 4, even in a dream. But as we'll see, he's not going to hang on to that belief long. Okay? Here's an excerpt from this part of the meditation. There is the fact that I am here seated by the fire, attired in a dressing gown, having this paper in my hands and other similar matters. And how could I deny that these hands and this body were mine? Were it not perhaps that I compare myself to certain crazy people, devoid of sense, whose cerebella are so troubled and clouded by the violent vapors of black bile, that they constantly assure us that they think they are kings when they are really quite poor, or that they are clothed in purple when they are really without covering, or who imagine that they have a jar head, or are nothing but pumpkins, or are made of glass. But these people are mad. They're having hallucinations. They don't have a firm grip on reality. And I should not be any the less insane were I to follow examples so extravagant. So isn't it obvious that you're seated here in the classroom right now listening to me speak? Isn't that self-evident to you? Isn't it obvious and true that you have a body? That the hands in front of you are yours? You're not an insane person, are you? Well, he continues. At the same time, I must remember that I am a man, and that consequently, I am in the habit of sleeping. I go to sleep every night. And in my dreams, I represent to myself the same things, or sometimes even less probable things than do those who are insane in their waking moments. How often has it happened to me that in the night I dreamt that I found myself right here in this particular place, that I was dressed and seated near the fire, whilst in reality I was lying undressed in bed. In thinking over this, I remind myself that on many occasions I have in sleep been deceived by similar illusions. And in dwelling carefully on this reflection, I see so manifestly that there are no certain indications by which we may clearly distinguish being awake from being asleep, that I'm lost in astonishment. And my astonishment is such that it is almost capable of persuading me that I now dream. So, what is Descartes saying here? What possibility has he just raised? Not that he's actually seated by the fire and writing this out and thinking, but what? Somebody shout it out. If I go like this, does it help? Yeah, that he's asleep. Are there any proofs that you are awake right now and in the classroom with me? Can you prove that to yourself? Maybe this is just a dream that you're having. How would you know? You've all had dreams that were extremely convincing and vivid, haven't you? So much so that you thought they were real life and they freaked you the hell out. How do you know that's not happening right now? And I'm just your subconscious talking to you in your dream. Can you know for a fact that you are awake right now? Let's take it even further. Can you know for a fact you're not in a simulation? We could all be in the Matrix right now, right? How would we know? How could we prove it? Are there any certain indications that we're not in a simulation 5 levels down? You know, Rick and Morty style or whatever? How would we know? How do you know with certainty that you have a body? That you have had the experiences that you've had? Maybe the entire universe just spontaneously came into existence last Thursday. And you've spontaneously come into existence with all these memories of things you've never actually experienced. How could we know with certainty? Can we? Is this freaking anybody out? Maybe we're all just having a collective hallucination because we were hanging out in the Amazon and we decided to take an ayahuasca trip. How would you know? How would you know, right? This is what Descartes is asking himself. And he's like, oh my goodness, I can't prove to myself that I'm awake right now. Similarly, I wouldn't be able to prove to myself with certainty that I have a body, that I'm really where I think I am. This is a serious problem, right? Because if knowledge requires complete certainty, his whole world has been thrown into uncertainty with these doubts, right? This is what he's wrestling with. How is he going to get out of it? Once we've gotten to this place, can we get out of it? Can we actually achieve knowledge of anything? If we don't know what kind of reality we're in, or if we're real? He comes to the conclusion that it appears everything can be doubted. The entire history of humanity, whether or not we're awake or asleep right now, whether or not we're in a simulation that Elon Musk is trying to break us out of, whether we're in the Matrix, whether or not we have a body, whether or not we are who we think we are. Some philosophers have argued that odds are high that we are living in a simulation. That you're either just a pod person like Neo was in the Matrix and you don't know it, or you're just a brain with electrodes attached to it hooked up to a computer that's simulating your reality. How could we know? Go ask your friends this later and see if you can freak them out a little bit. But then give him the rest of what we're going to explore, because Descartes is going to find a way out of this predicament. Or at least he thinks he does. Bless you. But to make things even harder on himself, because again, he's looking for firm, certain foundations of knowledge, he's going to make a wild, hypothetical assertion. He's going to say, okay, so I'm stuck, I don't really know anything, my reality is falling apart. Let's make things more difficult. And so he comes up with this thought experiment. And he says, because I'm looking for firm and certain foundations of human knowledge, this is what I'm going to assume. I am going to assume that there is an evil demon or God out there who is feeding me a false picture of reality, whose whole goal is to deceive me. I'm going to assume that. And then if I can find something that I can know with certainty, that's the foundation that I've been looking for. And so he runs through this thought experiment. Let me put the question to you. Assume, let's say God exists, but God is evil, and God just wants to screw you over and deceive you. If that's the case, if all of the sensations that you are experiencing, the ideas that you're having, if those are all illusions meant to deceive you, is there anything that you can know with complete certainty? If anybody knows their philosopher Descartes, you'll be raising your hand right now. Because he provides a very interesting answer to this question. Say more. Say more, Maxwell.
Like, I know I'm here. I don't know if you guys are. I'm not here, so I can be sure of that.
You can be sure that you exist?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying? How? Why?
I'm thinking. So.
Ah, there we go. There we go. Descartes thinks that despite this, despite assuming this is true, there is at least one thing that he can know. And like an epiphany, it arises from the mental depths, and he shouts it out, "Cogito ergo sum," which is a Latin phrase, because all these guys wrote in Latin, and that was the language of the intelligentsia before mathematics became the language, the common universal language. He says, "Cogito ergo sum." Does anybody know what this means? I think, therefore I am. Or another way of putting it is this. You are all having perceptions right now. You are all thinking, let's say. If there's thinking going on, there must be something doing the thinking. If there's thinking going on in your head right now, there must be something doing the thinking. Consequently, if you are thinking, you can know with absolute certainty that you exist. Because thoughts don't come from nowhere. Thoughts stem from consciousness, or from a spirit, or a soul, or whatever you want to call it. And this is what Descartes realizes. Even if this is true, he can know that he exists. Or to justify it another way, if such an evil god or demon exists, whose sole purpose is to deceive him, Descartes can know he exists. Because there has to be someone the demon's trying to deceive. Yeah? And so this is something he thinks we can know with absolute certainty. That as long as we are thinking, we can know we exist. I can't know if any of you exist, but I can know that I exist because I'm thinking right now. And you can do the thought yourself. You can know that you exist. You do know that. And so this is what Descartes is going to use as the foundation for his and human knowledge moving forward. He's going to build it off of this. This is something that is certain, conclusive, proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. Because if you doubt your own existence, that implies that you exist. Because if you didn't exist, you wouldn't be able to doubt it. Right? So it's a weird kind of logical argument. But it seems pretty robust. At least Descartes thinks so. So then the next question is this. Okay, so each of us knows that I exist. You know that you exist. You know that you exist. What kind of things are we? What is this I? What are its properties? How does it work? Well, that's the next question that he turns to. He begins to consider what kind of thing he is. What or who he is. And he tries to provide some sort of answers to that. What kind of thing are you? What kind of thing am I? Well, based on the proof he just provided, Descartes expresses that he is a thinking thing. That's the kind of thing that he is. He's a thing that thinks and doubts and understands. To put it in his words, he finds that he is a mind or a consciousness, or a soul, or an understanding, or a reason. A thinking thing, a thing which doubts, understands, conceives, affirms, denies, wills, refuses, which also imagines and perceives. That's the kind of thing that he finds he is. That's the kind of thing that you are. You are a thinking thing. You are a consciousness. You are a mind. And so the implication here is somehow that, like, what makes you who you are is your mind or your consciousness, not your body. Why? Well, let's run through a few examples. If I chop your arm off, are you still you? Yeah, right? You don't become a different person. If you are in a terrible accident and you lose all your limbs, are you still you? Yeah, you don't become me. You don't become George Washington. Right? You have a unique mind, a unique consciousness, a unique immaterial thing that makes you who you are. And another reason that he gives for thinking that there is a difference between the mind and the body is the mind can doubt its own existence, but through that process, we'll realize that it exists. The body is something that we can imagine or conceive of as something that we don't even have, but we still think that we would be who we are. Right? If I hooked you up to a simulation and you're in the simulation, your body's not in the simulation. We say you are, or your mind is. So, what are we fundamentally? We are thinking things. A mind, a consciousness. That is what makes you who you are. And thus, on his view, there is a distinction between your mind and your body. You have a body, and they're connected, but they're not the same thing. Your body is extended in space. It has a volume to it. Your body is material, physical. It's made of matter. It's made of atoms. Your mind is not like this. Tell me, where is your mind? Is it located in space, like a table is located in space? Descartes would say no. Is your mind something that you can cut up, like you can cut up a physical thing? No, we've been through that already. So your consciousness or your mind cannot be reduced to your body. Your mind is not just your brain. It's something more. It's something different. Your brain states affect your mental states and vice versa, but they're not the same. They're different in kind. Okay? And that is what he is trying to show here. Somehow what the human being is this conjunction of matter and mind. Dualism. After this, the meditations take a turn. He moves from metaphysical speculation to epistemological speculation. Locke thought that the way that we apprehend reality is through the senses, but Descartes tries to provide an example in which he shows that that's not true. What he's going to say is, using this example, the way that you grasp and understand reality is not through the senses, but through the mind, through your consciousness. And he uses this wax example to try to show that. To try to show that the apprehension and comprehension of the universe, of the world, occurs in and by and through the mind. Rationalism, right? Through the operations of the mind, and more particularly through reason. So somehow, what he's going to try to argue here is, you know things because your mind is doing something. Not because your sense organs are taking in stimuli and sensing. So how does he motivate this? Well, let's read what he has to say. Let us begin with the commonest matters, those which we believe to be the most distinctly comprehended, to wit, the bodies which we touch and see. Let us consider one in particular. Let us take, for example, this piece of wax. He has a piece of wax in his hand. It has been taken quite freshly from the hive, and it has not yet lost the sweetness of the honey which it contains. It still retains somewhat of the odor of the flowers from which it has been culled. So, it's kind of sweet like honey. It smells like flowers. Its color, its figure, its size are apparent. It is hard. Right? He's got like a congealed piece of wax, you know. It's hard, cold, easily handled. And if you strike it with the finger, it will emit a certain sound. But notice that while I speak and approach the fire with the wax, what remained of the taste is exhaled. The smell evaporates. The color alters. The figure is destroyed. The size increases. It becomes liquid. It heats up. Scarcely can one handle it. And when one strikes it, no sound is emitted. Does the same wax remain after it has been melted and dripped onto the ground? What do you think? Is that the same piece of wax he was holding? I see some nods. Yeah, most people would say yes, right? You had the wax in your hand, and then you brought it to the fire, and that caused it to melt, and now it's on the floor. It's the same piece of wax, just in a different form. Right? It was solid, had a certain smell and taste and shape, and now it's liquid, has a different smell, taste, and shape. We must confess that it remains. None would judge otherwise. What then did I know so distinctly in this piece of wax? How could he know that the wax he was just holding is the same one that's now on the floor? Not through the senses. Why? It could certainly be nothing of all that the senses brought to my notice, since all these things which fall under taste, smell, sight, touch, and hearing are found to be changed. And yet the same wax remains. So all of the sensible qualities of the wax has changed, yet we know that it's the same piece of wax. If we were really grasping and understanding reality through the senses, how could we know it's the same piece of wax if everything about it that we touch, see, smell, hear, and taste is different now? Well, it's because it's your mind that's doing it. Your mind is cluing you into how reality works, not your senses. Perhaps it was what I now think, that this wax was not that sweetness of honey, nor that agreeable scent of flowers, nor that particular whiteness, nor that figure, nor that sound, but simply a body which a little while ago appeared to me as perceptible under these forms, and which is now perceptible under others. But what precisely is it that I imagine when I form such conceptions? Clearly nothing remains except a certain extended thing which is flexible and movable. What is the meaning of this? Is it not that I imagine that this piece of wax, being round and capable of becoming square and of passing from a square to a triangular figure? No, certainly it is not that. So what he's saying is, he doesn't know it's the same piece of wax through imagination. He knows it somehow else. His mind is doing something else. It is not that, since I imagine it admits of an infinitude of similar changes in the imagination. And I nevertheless do not know how to compass the infinitude by my imagination. And consequently, this conception which I have of the wax is not brought about by the faculty of imagination. What about extension? Is it not also unknown? For it becomes greater when the wax is melted, greater when it is boiled, and greater still when the heat increases. And I should not conceive clearly according to truth what wax is, if I did not think that even this piece that we are considering is capable of receiving more variations in extension than I have ever imagined. And he concludes with this. We must then grant that I could not even understand through the imagination what this piece of wax is, nor through the senses, and that it is my mind alone which perceives it, and is able to show us, tell us that is the same piece of wax after everything sensible about it has changed. I will say this piece of wax in particular, for whether or not this holds for wax in general is yet unclear. But what is this piece of wax, which cannot be understood excepting by the understanding or mind? It is certainly the same that I see, touch, imagine. And finally, it is the same piece of wax, which I have always believed it to be from the beginning. But what must be particularly be observed is that its perception is neither an act of vision, nor of touch, nor of imagination, and has never been such, although it may have appeared formerly to be so, but only an intuition of the mind, which may be imperfect and confused as to what it was formerly, or clear and distinct as it is at present. So, Descartes thinks he shows with this example that the way that we obtain knowledge of the world is not through our senses, through our sense organs. It's our mind. Our mind is doing something. It's like grasping it somehow. It is the mind which perceives and understands the nature of reality. After this, in the following meditations, Descartes is going to work on building back up his knowledge, his body of knowledge. Remember, we began with him doubting the senses, doubting whether he has a body, doubting whether he's awake. Well, slowly but surely, based on the idea that we can trust clear and distinct perceptions that our mind gives us, he tries to demonstrate that yes, we have bodies. Yes, there are things out there. Yes, I'm awake right now. He provides a few proofs for the existence of God. Slowly, he builds his knowledge back up. And so his view of how we obtain knowledge of the world is based on clear and distinct ideas. We can trust what the mind is giving us if its perceptions are clear and distinct. What is in the mind, a lot of it, is immediately apparent to our awareness. It is not filtered through any mechanism like the senses, our sense organs, or anything like that. And so he comes back to having a lot of the same beliefs he had before, that logic works and makes sense and has rules, and the same with geometry, that there are objects out there in the world, that we're not in a simulation, that God exists, all that. But we're not going to walk through all of those pages. And so, why are we looking at this? Why are we investigating this at all? You might be wondering. Well, it's a good view to compare and contrast with Locke. It's good for your philosophy education generally. But I'm trying to get at something even more fundamental than that. See, what you believe about what makes this stuff up and how it got here, and whether or not God exists, and how you obtain knowledge of the world around you, whether you realize it or not, informs all of your other beliefs. That is why we're going through this stuff. If you think that knowledge of the world comes through experience, then what will you believe? We should organize our politics and law and economic systems by listening to lived experience. If you think that knowledge comes from reason and logic, you're going to say, no, we got to trust the rational argument. Lived experience can be wrong. Who cares? We got to do what's rational. Right? Whether or not you think this stuff is made up of just matter or matter and mind, that's going to cause you to have certain views about whether or not you think free will exists. And consequently, whether or not you think anybody is morally responsible for anything. And what that should imply for you is the question, well, if nobody is morally responsible for anything, because we're just electric meat machines and we can't control what the reactions in our brain are doing, there's no justification for punishing and locking people up. Because the serial killer couldn't choose what he was doing. He had no control over his actions. His brain just made him do it. The atoms in his brain just made him do that. So, your views on morality, your views on social and political theory, your views on how you think you should live, what you think a good life is all downstream from the fundamental ideas we're discussing in this first unit. That's why we're looking at it, and that's why we're starting with it. Because if you're not clear on this stuff, you're never going to have a cogent conversation with somebody. You're just going to go around in circles because you don't agree on the fundamental views. You haven't interrogated your fundamental beliefs or axioms of the world. So, rationalism, most of those people think that our ideas and concepts are innate. We come pre-programmed with them. They think that we should prefer a priori logical knowledge, deductive knowledge. Consequently, we should base our societies around knowledge derived from reason. And the empiricists are basically going to think the opposite. We should lean on experience. We should listen to lived experience. Logic can get us some places, but experience. Okay, any questions, concerns, comments? Okay. I will see you all next week then. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to me blabber on. I appreciate all of you.